acknowledgement. We gather today on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people who've lived in the Salish Sea Basin throughout the San Juan Islands and the North Cascades watershed from time immemorial. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude for our Indigenous neighbors, the Lummi Nation and Nooksack Tribe, for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. Let some more people in and then we'll get going. Okay, my name is Terry Bryant. I work at Opportunity Council as the director of the Welcome Homeless Service Center, and I'm the chair of this group. So thanks everyone for joining, especially our speakers, which I'm really excited about. What I'd like to do, we probably don't have enough time for everybody to do introductions here, but please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Include your email if you'd like us to add you to the mailing list for the coalition. Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I see Poe. Thanks so much for being here. And I am going to apologize because I don't know how to pronounce your last name. Should I chance it or should I ask you?
Go ahead and give it a shot.
Okay. Leapai. How'd I do?
You did great. You did great.
Really?
Yeah, the E is actually pronounced E, so it's a Leapai.
Leapai, thank you.
Yeah, I'll respond to both.
Appreciate it. Thanks for joining us today. You're from the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance, here to talk about state-level advocacy. It's a really great time to have Poe here. There's a lot of interest in engaging coalitions across the balance of state. And there's some activity happening that we'll want to be abreast of for Advocacy Day coming up in February. So thanks so much for being here. And then our other speaker is Rebecca Quirke. And I'm really excited for that too, because Rebecca can talk about what she's working on locally in terms of advocacy with Tenant's Revolt. So let's go ahead and get started if that's okay. Poe, do you mind telling us a little bit more about advocacy and what we can expect from the legislative session?
Yeah, thank you so much, Terry, for having me, and hello, everyone. I am Poe Leapai, the advocacy organizer at the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance. Good to be here with you all. We are gearing up to support a very ambitious and robust agenda this 2023 legislative session at the Housing Alliance. We also have a supportive agenda that's on its way to us that we are planning to support as well. All in all, if I could say just maybe one thing I would like to say is that folks who are impacted come with a special level of expertise, you know, when trying to figure out the formula of things. And so we lean and we center the voices of those directly impacted by unsheltered homelessness and housing insecurity and instability. Sorry about that. And so that's what we do over here at the Housing Alliance, is policy and legislation around affordable housing, tenant protections, as well as homelessness prevention. Thank you. But I did prepare something if you'd like me to just jump right into it and share.
I would love that.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you again for this opportunity, y'all. I just introduced myself. I am Poe Leapai, advocacy organizer at the Housing Alliance. I am originally from Compton, California, but the beautiful Pacific Northwest has been my home for over 25 years. I just want to share our mission statement at the Housing Alliance real quick. And there are two parts. The first part is, we change public policy so that people in Washington of all races, ethnicities, abilities, genders, and identities can live in safe, healthy homes that they can afford. Number two, we do this through educating decision makers, organizing and amplifying the voices and priorities of people and communities most impacted by housing instability and homelessness. Today, I would like to focus on my personal lived experience around housing instability and homelessness. I'd also like to share a little bit about policy advocacy through the Housing Alliance and how impacted stories from those experiencing unsheltered homelessness can change the laws of the land. I believe that good health overall begins within a safe and stable home. No home equals unsheltered homelessness. No shelter means you are at the mercy of the elements, and frankly, it's very cold outside. We all need a place to come home to after work. We all need a place to come home to after school. I grew up low income and my family still lives low income today, living off food stamps, food banks, and DSHS medical coverage. I experienced homelessness months after my release from prison in 2005, and I served most of my time at the Monroe Correctional Complex in Monroe, Washington. Upon my release from prison, and despite my 180-degree turnaround in life, I was still met with barriers that were created by false and fear-mongering narratives. The stigma behind those narratives kept me from finding housing and employment, and eventually pushed me into living out of my car for almost a year. While nights were cold during the cold seasons, and much of my money, the little bit I had, went to gas so that I could turn on my car heater at night. Some days were spent visiting food pantries so that I had something to eat. Jobs I was able to acquire were under the table bouncer jobs at nightclubs and mostly on the weekends. But today, my friends, my life is much different. Today, I'm impacted to be impactful. I want to thank you all for the few minutes to share, for those few minutes and allowing me to share my roots and my upbringing. During my job search last summer, the summer of 2021, my goal was to join an organization that worked on state level policy that I could relate to, specifically housing policy and housing justice work. I was especially looking for an organization that centered the expertise of those impacted directly by homelessness and housing instability. The Housing Alliance organizes and advocates for policy legislation that supports affordable, permanent, supportive housing, homelessness prevention, and tenant protections. We operate with a racial equity lens, which is key to fighting systemic oppression. At the Housing Alliance, I truly felt like I found my tribe. As a matter of fact, I celebrated my first year at the Housing Alliance on November 15th, just 2 weeks ago. Now, let's dive into some advocacy. In housing justice work, impacted communities come with lived experience, as I mentioned earlier. Those lived experiences should be centered when advocating for housing stability and for policies that aim to end and prevent homelessness. With 3 seats in each of our 49 legislative districts and here in Washington State, we have 147 different lawmakers to build and maintain relationships with. We know that lawmakers listen first and foremost to their local constituents, and we are constantly striving to mobilize in districts. Knowing which state lawmakers hold key decision-making positions in Olympia can easily make their district a key district of focus. Once identified, we then mobilize and organize heavily within those key districts. I had the honor of joining hundreds of testifiers at our 2022 legislative session earlier this year. I shared my lived experience of homelessness with lawmakers, and so did many others, hoping to influence policy around affordable housing, tenant protections, and homelessness prevention. I was tasked at the time with identifying impacted communities across the state and help bring their stories to the attention of lawmakers so that lawmakers can support the changes that are needed to keep everyone housed. Before the 2022 legislative session, the Housing Alliance spent a good deal of time the previous summer, last summer, 2021, identifying and reaching out to those with lived experience of homelessness and housing instability. That summer, the summer of 2021, surveys, one-on-one meetings, calls, focus groups, and listening sessions were some of the ways we engaged with impacted communities. And not just them, but direct service providers, healthcare professionals, and advocates from all across the state. Our outreach was accompanied by relationship building and healthy follow-throughs. By the time our state's 2022 legislative session rolled around this past January, we had hundreds of testifiers and even more submitted testimonies. Hundreds of phone calls to lawmakers were also made. Thursday, March 10th of 2022 was the last day of the 2022 legislative session, and we celebrated historic investments in affordable homes and homelessness prevention by way of the Housing Trust Fund. This was made possible because stories from impacted communities were centered within our campaign. We encouraged impacted communities and those connected with those communities, like health professionals and frontline direct service providers, to share those stories at session in hopes of educating lawmakers, and it paid off. It's heavier whenever we have to relive the trauma of what we've been through, but it is also empowering when we watch our stories move the needle forward. Our elected housing champions also played a massive role in our success at our legislative session this year. I thank each and every one of them. And now I will share our Housing Alliance 2023 legislative session, legislative priorities. Afterwards, I will open up the floor for any questions or thoughts. Here is the link If you would like, go ahead and feel free to pull up the agenda for the Housing Alliance. Here's the link in the chat. And to be honest with y'all, I won't read every single detail in our agenda, but I will highlight a few. But before I continue, I just want to give you a second to pull that up. Go right ahead, and I will begin now. First, the state should make a significant investment of $400 million in affordable housing to build and preserve permanently and deeply affordable homes. We are asking for the Housing Trust Fund investment of $400 million for the state capital budget. More details in that part right there. We are asking for a new permanent fund source for the Housing Trust Fund. A new permanent fund source for the Housing Trust Fund would ensure significant investments. The state should also authorize new local options to fund affordable housing, such as a new real estate excise tax for affordable housing and operations. The state's operating budget should invest approximately $8 million for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color-led organizations for organizational support and capacity building to address inequitable access to the capital budget. The state should invest in homelessness prevention, cash assistance, and housing and essential needs rental assistance. We are asking them to address the 50% decline in funding for homelessness prevention with general fund dollars. We are also asking that to end the housing and essential needs benefits cliff by extending the SSI pilot statewide and making it permanent. This would allow tenants to get continued rental assistance once they qualify for SSI or SSDI. We ask they change the Aged, Blind, and Disabled or ABD program to end the requirement that extremely low-income disabled people pay back the benefit. The requirement that extremely low-income disabled people pay back the benefit. We are also asking lawmakers this year to bring back the cash assistance program for temporarily disabled, extremely low-income people that was eliminated during the Great Recession budget cuts in 2011. The state should invest in eviction prevention. Continuing funding for pre-eviction civil legal aid and add $400,000 to allow the eviction defense screening line to assist tenants who are not yet eligible for a right to counsel. We ask to increase funding for statewide right to counsel to properly operate the program, meet statutory requirements, and serve eligible tenants. We ask to increase funding for the Tenancy Preservation Program, or the TPP, and Landlord Mitigation Fund. The state should support and stabilize the nonprofit housing and homelessness workforce. We are asking them to make a 2022 one-time Department of Commerce grantee administrative increase permanent. More ideas are being discussed and explored, so stay tuned. The state should address rent increases. Some of the bills I want to introduce to y'all and share with you all. These bills that I'm going to share, we introduced last session, and we are going to support and push for them this session again. House Bill 1904 would require landlords to provide 6 months notice of significant rent increases, provide tenants with the right to quit their lease due to the rent increase, and cap late fees. We also asked to prevent rent gouging by capping rent increases, cap and regulate fees, and close the just cause loophole that allows landlords to use rent increases to deny tenants of their rights under the state Residential Landlord Tenant Act. We are trying to get House Bill 2023 passed as well, and this bill will create an enforcement mechanism for landlord obligations under the Residential Landlord Tenant Act. This would create a legal process for tenants to hold their landlord accountable and to shift state laws from self-help laws to rights that can be enforced by a court of law. Right now, tenants have no mechanism to hold their landlord accountable, even when tenants are illegally locked out, even when tenants face serious repair issues, even when landlords violate source of income discrimination protections, even when landlords harass tenants or illegally enter their apartments, etc. This would also put tenant protections under the enforcement of the State Attorney General and the Consumer Protection Act. The CPA provides important protections and penalties when violated. Tenant protection, if I can be real with y'all, tenant protections are so important to me. Last week, I met with two families on the verge of experiencing homelessness because of their rent increase. And so a lot of these are like, for me, they all are so important to keeping folks housed and out of experiencing those unsheltered homelessness scenarios and situations. At the bottom, all bill numbers will be reassigned for the new biennium starting on January 9th of 2023. Thank you again for having me today. If we have time, I'd gladly like to take questions or thoughts or feedback. Yeah.
We do have time, and if anyone's more comfortable asking their question in the chat, I'm happy to read that out loud. And I'll just kick it off with a question. And that is, we do solicit input for Advocacy Day when we plan to meet with our lawmakers. But how can we increase the testimony for people with lived experience, especially if they're not able to engage in that way on that date?
Reach out to me. Reach out to me. Yes, I'll leave my, I'll put my email here in the chat. I can make that happen for you. And just send anyone from Whatcom County my way, and I will take care of you in that.
Thanks, Poe.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like I thank you all again for the space and for all the work you're doing up there. I feel like we are all a spoke on the same wheel, trying to move that wheel forward. And so I appreciate this and being here today. Here's my email there. Please reach out to y'all anytime. I never clock out, to be real with you. I know I'm supposed to set boundaries and stuff, but hit me up anytime. Seriously, thank you. If I may, I would like to invite y'all to save the date for some events coming up, and we would love to have you all there.
Great.
Cool. Thank you. Please save the date for HAD. HAD, HHAD, stands for Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Days. And that falls on February 6th through the 8th, 2023. So February 6th, 7th, and 8th of 2023, all folks impacted, all folks who are supporting them and are coming that week. The first day on the 6th is more of a gathering where we get excited, we come together, we update priorities, and we just and we're looking forward to, we share what we're looking forward to in the coming weeks, months. And then the 7th and 8th will be 2 days where constituents meet with their lawmakers. We're going to have breakout rooms for all districts, and then folks will be able to come in there and talk one-on-one with their lawmaker, or group to one with their lawmakers. So that date, once again, is February 6th through the 8th, 2023. And I would also like to let you all know that during session, the Housing Alliance will be launching or sending out what we are calling the Legislative Advocacy Hub. And once you get this is the place, the one-stop place where you can go get all the information throughout session, updates, action alerts, anything that we have, our network, our partners. We will also be promoting that on that same site. So be on the lookout for our Legislative Advocacy Hub. And I think that's it for me. I think that's all I have. But I am here for any questions or thoughts or feedback. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Poe. I have one, maybe a follow-up question, and then I'll be quiet and let other people ask. But when you said breakout sessions, is it going to be online virtually, or is it in person again?
It will be online. Good question. Yeah. But to be transparent with you all, we have been talking about hybrid options more and more in the future. And so we also see the benefit of folks being able to, tune in and join us from wherever they are. But I'm a people person. I love being in person. I love seeing faces and us, getting together in fellowship. So that's where I'm at. But I'm respecting the landscape and the climate that we live in. So I totally, but it will be online. There will be a link where everyone can join. It will be virtual.
Great, thank you. And last year was pretty interesting, but I think a lot of folks found it more convenient to join online, and I wonder if we could get more people with lived experience to do so as well, because going to Olympia from Whatcom County is a long, long day.
Long drive. It's a
Yeah,
long day. Yeah.
yeah. And Poe, I want to call out what Barbara said here. She thanks you for all the great work you do at the Low Income Housing Alliance and for joining us today. Really appreciate your time so much.
Likewise, and I appreciate you all. Thank you, Barbara, for that. And thank you all for having me. Huge blessing to me, y'all. Thanks.
That last part of what Poe shared with us is interesting. It's all about tenant advocacy and protections. And I think that just leads us right into Tenant Revolt with Rebecca Quirke. And thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to hear about what your group is doing and planning. And yeah, looking forward to a discussion too.
Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Yeah, and thank you for inviting me to present. It's really nice to see so many faces of people who are invested in the rights of the houseless, the rights of all people. I didn't do a wonderful job of doing a big script, so I'll just leave a little bit more room for questions, and hopefully there are questions. So I'm new to Whatcom County. My name's Rebecca Quirke. I'm the Chief Enforcement Officer of Tenants Revolt against white collar crime. So I'm new to Whatcom County. I moved to Bellingham a year ago. I've rented all over the country for the last 20 years. So I'm a renter. I'm also a landlord. And I've never experienced such bold and widespread abuses of renters anywhere that I've lived and through the duration of my rental history as I've experienced in Bellingham. Last winter, I experienced living without heat in my landmark rental. In the summer, I met the mother of a young woman who came to Bellingham to live in her first rental, and that property was not up to code. And it had faulty wiring and it burned down, killing her 2 cats, destroying everything that she owned. And hearing this story, I was absolutely heartbroken for her. And as a person who's experienced devastation at the hands of landlord negligence, I was compelled to take action. I was already doing something about the fact that Landmark refused to make rent concessions in my situation, even though my house was so cold that the pipes froze and burst. And their insistence on their margins being protected instead of the house being safe to inhabit was horrifying. But the more that I talked to people about it, the more obvious it was that there's a real disconnection in Whatcom County between the people who own the properties and the people who actually live here. More than 55% of Bellingham are renters. And the techniques that are being used to quiet the renters, to have them living in squalor, paying exorbitant amounts for that, is just unconscionable. So I teamed up with an attorney, Daniel Hornell, and we are working together to hold accountable every single person that is weaponizing housing and treating it like an asset instead of a resource. People are dying, and it's so far beyond anything that I've seen. It still just shocks me every day. And every renter that I talk to, I'm hearing the same sentiments over and over, that they feel completely lost. They feel vulnerable. They feel like they're just scraps away from being made homeless. And they're doing everything they can to appease their landlords, their property management companies, and there's just been no accountability. So we are using the only language they understand, and that's dollars. And we want all of the dollars that have been illegally charged to renters. We want people made whole. We want everyone to feel confident asserting their rights as renters, and to know that the community does support them. Because a community with people who are being protected and who can live safely and securely, who can plant a garden and enjoy the fruits of their labor, that's really important for absolutely everyone in the community. And people being threaded in and investing is a win for everyone. So that's what we're about. And yeah, anyone with questions, I'd love to hear them if possible, but yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you, Rebecca. I want to start with a question, and that's, well, I want to tell you that I'm really impressed with the momentum you have. You don't slow down. So I feel like what you're doing is something that's sustainable, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that unfolds. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you're doing for outreach. We talked about that recently just a little bit with regards to a couple specific complexes, but I just want to hear a little bit more about that.
When you say outreach, you mean like reaching out to tenants, like initially?
Yeah, making sure people know what you're doing and how to connect. And I also want to read a question from Lydia Place, case managers. What action steps are you taking to execute this amazing vision?
Litigation. So it's really the only thing that that these people are really seem attached to, because it's their wallets. And the steps that we're taking are, we're talking to, we have about 400 people signed up right now for the action that want to litigate. And so with that, so to answer your question, Terry, I'm doing great. I stand by my choppiness. Thanks everybody for bearing with me. We're not doing much outreach. The only time that we go out and door knock is when we speak to people with in specific complexes that are dealing with treacherous abuses, that are being poisoned by mold, that are people living with disabilities that don't have accessibility. It's all over the board. There's just so much, there's just such boldness by these property owners and property management companies. So that's really the only time that we've reached out so far. When people go to our website, tenantsrevolt.org, and there's a sign up sheet, a Google form to fill out to be part of the mass action lawsuits, where people describe what they've been experiencing, and then we get in touch with them and we say, okay, now reach out to every single person in your phone that lives in Bellingham, homeowner, renter, put things on social media. We have a couple of folks that are running our social media that just kind of took over, and they have a combined following between the two of them over 1 million people on TikTok. So we're definitely going far and wide. It's funny because people see a singularity, because I'm just one person that's has the only face and house that doesn't have to be anonymous. And there are hundreds of people involved in this, and everyone's laying low because they are vulnerable, because we don't want them unhoused. The issues that that we're seeing with homelessness is so serious, and it's really challenging to not be part of that more actively. But I feel like we need to stop the bleeding. We need to make sure that people feel confident and secure in their homes, because that's really the only point when they can offer help to folks that are unhoused. When we're desperately trying to stay in our place, it's hard to share. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank
Okay.
you. Lucy had an observation she's sharing, and that I've heard this since I moved here in 2000. Multiple people in Bellingham, including Lucy, experience continual illness due to mold exposure in rental properties. Are you hearing a lot of that from participants?
So many participants, so many. Lucy, I'm so sorry to hear that. Mold poisoning is a very serious issue, and it's something that we are pursuing. Legislation is the legislation around that is really problematic. A lot of legislation around renting is really problematic right now. The thing with mold, proving it, having access to the testing that is admissible in court is a challenge. So part of the efforts that we're making that I can share is fixing the very fractured system that's in place with the city and with the county. So I was reaching out to different organizations to get mold testing done in units where people had flooding, all of their carpet was saturated with water, and the complex's solution, and this was in low-cost housing. P.S. Everyone in low-cost housing in the county is on a month-to-month lease after their first year. So there are people on month-to-month leases that have been living in places for 2 decades or more. It's unconscionable. And I don't know why that feels okay. But with the mold, we were reaching out to different organizations and trying to find someone who could offer that. The Northwest Clean Air Washington, who was recommended to me by Terry. And then they said, oh, you should reach out to Opportunity Council. And then they said, oh, well, maybe the health department. And the funding has been pulled. And it's an interesting point, Lucy, because I do think of housing security, safe, secure, up to code housing is the only way that we really live in a place. If we can't plant a garden, if we're only going to be in a place for a year, then that's not a home, that's a place that we're staying. The fact that these companies make more money having people move out after a year than they do having people stay is horrific. You know, we're playing musical chairs with like really vile conditions. And so we are working on the mold, and we do have avenues that we're pursuing to build cases around that. And if you haven't filled out a form yet, Lucy, please do.
I will. Yeah, I wanted to bring up another thing with that too, is with mold exposure, you can become severely disabled. I mean, I'm lucky. I only have a few issues that came out of it, but I know people who are at this point cannot be exposed to any amount of mold, cannot go into thrift stores, have trouble getting housing now because any risk of mold, it will completely devastate their lives. And it's like, there's no accountability. There's no paying back of that. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse of housing insecurity.
Yeah, it's cumulative, right? That's it's so serious. And part of what we need to do collectively is come at this from so many different angles. The legislative session with the Resident Action Project and Washington Low Income Housing was wonderful. And being able to connect with people from all over the state who are doing similar work has been really great. I think that people have been asking politely for a long time for these folks who are in positions of power to please be considerate, to please behave ethically, and it hasn't happened. And for years, there's been a habitability standard that is not being adhered to. There's so much that's happening. I really want to connect with, Tenants Revolt. We want to connect with people who have worked for property management companies, who do work for property management companies, who worked for the city, who work for the city, to explain where they feel the disconnects are and how we can demand that they're remedied, because we're in a state of emergency and it's not getting better, and people are in really, really grave danger. And we need to find as many different angles as we can to move in from all sides to absolutely prevent this from going any further.
Thanks, Rebecca. I had a really good thing to say and I forgot what it was. I remembered it. There's a couple comments that I'm going to read. I see Bart's question. I'm not going to skip that, Bart. But Heather shares that mold exposure and poisoning happens in our public work buildings. LNIs refuse to accept cases and executives have refused to do the restoration work. Mold is everywhere. And then Doug talks about mold is a challenge in the Pacific Northwest. It's very wet here, and that you can catch it early when you notice it, right? But I think what's, and he's right. He's absolutely right. But what's concerning about
it's true. However, with the solution to mold is ceiling paint.
Yes.
And that's the thing. We're not talking about like a little bit of mold. We're talking about like I went to a neighbor's house during an inspection and they opened up a panel behind their stove and there was water staining coming out of the electric outlet. We're talking about like this little enclave was like so infested with mold that when I walked into their kitchen with a mask on, I had to step back. It is not a little bit of mold. The thing is, these places aren't being treated like housing that like should be safe because they're only for renters. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that the people who are renting out these places probably don't have mold infestation. So I think it's considerate and very neutral what you're saying, but also hilarious.
It just reminded me of that show on Netflix. Have you guys seen it? It's called Maid, and it's about the experience of a single mom in Port Townsend losing her housing related to domestic violence. And there's a scene where she's placed in shelter and loses her shelter because of the mold. And the mold that we're talking about was like between the studs, all in the insulation type of mold. So just wanted to throw that out there. And I think, Doug, you look like you wanted to say something.
Just, yeah, I'm not going to take up too much time, but I just wanted to clarify that Homes Now, I'm chairman of Homes Now. We run 2 of the 3 tiny home villages in Bellingham, Unity Village in Fairhaven and Swift Haven up by Frank Jerry Fields and the skate park. We are 100% resident managed, resident run, and no paid staff. And that means that the people who are homeless, who need the place, who need the help are the staff, and they run the place, and nobody's paid. I'm not paid. But what I wanted to make clear about is that when mold does pop up, which we've seen it pop up before, we literally have to just clean it. Like we don't treat them like renters. We don't say, hey, you know what? We don't care that you don't have mold. We're like, hey, we're seeing some mold, and we have to use bleach. We have to use 100% alcohol solution, and that mold is not acceptable, and we clean it as soon as we see it. And it's easy to pop up, especially if you've got multiple months of wet weather going on, but it's a collective effort to do that. But we will, it's not acceptable to say, hey, we see some mold and then just leave it.
Gotta
like
go,
that.
right. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And yeah, I was like poking a little bit because yeah, I've heard of you, and I'm like, I actually can't wait to go and see the tiny home village because
check out both. They're both different because it's run by the people who live there, and both villages are different.
Hey, that's, you know what that is? Autonomy and dignity. And I think that that's a component that like is really missing from all of this. Like renters should be treated with dignity because you can't afford your mortgage. So we're paying it for you. So treat us with a little dignity because we're subsidizing your living.
Yeah,
You're welcome. And if, you know, and it's just funny because the complaints that are coming through, like from the landlords and property management companies are like, oh, that's like mold. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you should get a job if you're having a hard time taking care of a house, because there are jobs that you can get. And like, if it's too much for you to handle, give us your house. We'll take over. We'll take care of it. We'll clean it out. But when you put cover up concealer over a bullet wound, and then you're like, well, now the bleeding's your problem, which is what we've seen, because they give out mold disclosures and they weaponize them. They treat them like, okay, well, we've done our part, so now any mold is your responsibility. But it's just mold that's covered in ceiling paint. So of course it's not going to be able to be remedied. And you're right, like Doug, when you've got a situation that you can like handle on your own, when you have like the money to do it, the understanding, and it's your own place, like, yeah, you just do it. You just take care of it yourself. This is just like so many years of neglect, because like the house that I rent, I don't know if anyone's seen the sign on the road, but that's where I live. And the Tenant's Revolt house, but it's when this place has been rented out since the 70s, and it's been neglected since then. This is not a home. This hasn't been a home for a long time. This is just a shell of a place where, you know, a peasant renter can live for very high rent. The walls are paper mache.
And after a number of years of this, after many years of this, it's really ingrained, and it's not. And also too, even if you were willing to, as a tenant, be like, look, I will do this, I will take care of this. And sometimes there is a tenant that's willing to do that. You're not technically allowed to. If you do, you might be legally in trouble for altering the wall or doing what you need to do to fix it. And yeah, I get that. And I'm just glad we don't have that issue, but I'm just letting you know that, yeah, it pops up, it's regular, but like, you know, and mold is serious. People can get very sick from mold, and it has to be dealt with, and we deal with it, and just letting you know. So.
Yeah, respect. It's kind of like if a person's like from Norway or Alaska, and they're like, oh yeah, well, you know, it's just how it works. If you live in Florida, then you're gonna get, you know, skin cancer. And it's like, well, no, like you put sunblock on. They're like, yeah, but that's like really hard. It's like you adapt to the climate that you live in, you adapt to the place where you live. And if people own a house in Washington, you better know what the climate's like. Or, you know, there are jobs. People can get jobs too. They don't want a landlord.
A couple of comments I want to share too. Chuck has experienced some mold exposure also, and recommends people use a dehumidifier, which is not as widely used as it should be, perhaps. But that, I mean, that will address it preventatively, as Chuck said. That doesn't help when you've already got this entrenched issue in your housing. So I really understand and respect the difference there. And Lucy shared too.
Can I say something to that?
Yeah.
Because I'm feeling so snarky all the time. I'm a monster. Sorry, everybody, but thank you. So just like the mold disclosure pamphlets that are really great and were passed out, this is a situation, there's a lot of like crossover, I think, about housing and consent. So things like, hey, you know, if there's mold poisoning, like, you know, you can do these things. It is true, but it's also like, well, hey, what were you wearing? Like, were you sexually assaulted? What were you wearing? That kind of thing. The responsibility is on the people that own these places and who were paying premium rates to rent from. They are responsible for maintaining the house. They're responsible for for keeping it safe and habitable. There are habitability standards on purpose, and people worked for a really long time and did really incredible work to advocate for that. And probably some people here, you know, it's like, it took so much work, and then the houses aren't being inspected. And the city inspectors have been in and out of my house since December. And they found 10 violations to the International Building Code of 2018, I believe. And it's like the lowest standard, much, much lower and the standards that are supposed to be adhered to with the inspections that are happening every year, supposedly. And the place that I live in had 10 violations to that. So this place wasn't legally able to be rented out. And I was paying $1,500 or something a month to live in a place that didn't have heat, you know, that was like just squalor. And so they were supposed to be issuing fines of $1,000 per day per violation for these issues, and they were charged $0. And these things were only remedied, like there's still actually a couple things that are outstanding, but like maybe 2 months ago. So the amount of like consideration that is being offered to people who are just treating us like filth, like we're garbage and like we don't deserve safe housing, is unreal. And so it's in the complaints that people are making about the crime surge in Bellingham. The crime that really needs to be fought in Bellingham is the white collar crime. And that is really what is harmful to people. That's really causing widespread harm.
I want to share Lucy's comment too, that she's frustrated when the landlord blames the tenant for mold. So they expect her to spend the money to superheat her house to slow down the infestation that existed when she moved in. And that's wrong. And then I'm sorry, I don't know which person at Lydia Place, but one of the Lydia Place case managers is asking if the city or county to speak to habitability complaints should go to, and what the accountability for those complaints might be.
I would love that.
I can speak a little bit to, so my shop is kind of removed from the inspection side of the city. They are a small but mighty team. So I know that they have limited capacity. But
sorry, the small and mighty team are the inspectors?
I believe so.
Yeah. Oh yeah, gotcha. Just wanted to understand, thanks.
And so I'm happy to direct any questions their way. I know, Rebecca, you mentioned wanting to connect with folks who work at the city to have those conversations, and happy to facilitate that. I'll put my email in the chat and feel free to reach out on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm in touch with the city inspectors, and they definitely know who I am. So so it's more a matter of like having a candid conversation about how to move forward. Because in my opinion, the city should be holding these companies accountable. And I understand that there are constraints. There is no inspector in the city that that is just for rental properties. There isn't one. And that's shocking for a place with as many renters as we have. And there are also issues with like buildings that are being built, and like the Eleanor Apartments. I don't know if folks here are familiar, but Eleanor is a Mercy housing development that was built like 4 years ago, I believe, across from Grocery Outlet. And the summer before last, a woman died in her room from heat stroke. It was 115 degrees inside her room. Mercy housing, new construction, and she died from heat stroke. It's horrifying. Like, how on earth did that issue with air circulation go through and, you know, receive the permits? Where's the accountability there? The handicap doors that they have there close and lock on people. One woman lost half a foot last year. Another woman broke her toe, or, you know, had her toe smashed from the doors. This is like this is housing that is for vulnerable populations. These are just elderly folks who are low income who live in this place. And who is making the money? How does it benefit the community? Well, I mean, it doesn't. That was a joke, but it doesn't benefit the community. But who is it benefiting? And like we as a community can claw back this power and say, you know, this person in Canada owns 50 houses in Bellingham that should all be condemned. Why on earth are they allowed to have that much power over our community when they don't even live here?
I'm going to share a little bit more from the chat. So Lydia Place staff was thinking about, how to support their clients that are in housing and our tenants. And Chris from the health department suggests that folks reach out to civil aid or services like Northwest Justice Project or law advocates if there's a violation of the Landlord Tenant Act.
Just so you know, they reach out to us if it's mold. Oh, sorry, not mold, just kidding.
And he's wondering, Rebecca, if you have a relationship with those agencies or have feedback regarding the result of their work for low-income tenants.
Northwest Justice Project. Hi, Chris. Northwest Justice Project and law advocates are both lovely. Every individual group that I've reached out to within the city, the county, with these advocacy groups are wonderful. The issue is that there is very little understanding of what the others are doing. Even within the city, there is so little transparency, so little accountability. And I don't know if that's by design or if it's by, it strikes me as odd that, trying to find resources, because people reach out all the time and, say like, I'm experiencing this, or I'm experiencing this, or I've been unhoused, and like, what can I do? And it's wild because even with the resources of like having shelter, and with me, like, being a reasonably intelligent person who has resources and is housed and has internet and computer and phone, I couldn't figure out where to send them. I was, like, oh, this shelter or this, and then it's like just full stop. It's like, it seems like there's a lot of threading that's missing that I think we could really, really improve, to have like a guide, to have something where people can know what's available to them and for what, and to know that it can be relied on. And, to do the same thing also for like renters' rights. I couldn't believe it took me so many months of searching before I found the warranty of habitability. And now we have a link to that on our website, and a link to find out who owns the property that you rent through the county assessor's website, and also a link to request an inspection from the city.
I want to go back to Bart's comment some minutes ago. He wanted to hear more about the litigation, who's doing it. And I'm curious about how that process is happening as well.
Yeah. Daniel Hornell with Palace Law is our attorney. We're also going to be collaborating and working in coalition with the law firm in Seattle that has spearheaded the class action lawsuit against artificial rent inflation. So I had a meeting with them today, and another one, last Monday. So we're working hand in hand with them, because the data that's been sent to us is going to be really beneficial for supporting that case, and a lot of the companies that they're going after, we also have in Bellingham. They go by different names, but they're all the same. Was there another question that I forgot?
I don't think so. Bart, did that answer your question? Is Bart here? He had to leave. I'll have to tell him about that answer.
And the litigation, right?
Yeah, about the litigation.
So that is a little bit closer to the vest. I can say broadly that we're preparing mass action suits for a series of property management companies. We also have class action suits that are being architected. And I think the first one is nearly ready to be filed, but I think the attorney would slap my wrist if I like gave much information. Are you curious about like the structure of it? What can I try to help clarify?
I guess like, where are you at with it? Like, are you ready to file suit? Are you still kind of trying to solicit more people to be represented?
We're always wanting more people. I don't want the litigations to ever stop until like things are actually rectified. So like Landmark is the first, I believe, the first mass action suit that's going to be filed. And that is going to be, yeah, I think probably in the next month or so. That's what I anticipate. But legal action always takes like longer than anyone wants it to. But it's, yeah, I don't have like a firm date of when that's planning on coming through. We're also having people, filling out forms for round 2 of Landmark already. So it's this is just going to be like kind of a rotating thing, and it's going to be based on like the level of evidence that we have, the number of people that are complaining. If we have 30 people in one apartment complex, then that's a little bit easier to show the threading of abuses than 30 separate houses with roommates kind of thing. So it's just a matter of like how we can be the most effective and ferocious.
So that helps me to know. I guess I had in my head it was just a one and done type of plan, but this is a strategy and a process you're looking at.
Oh yeah, this is because the mass action suits are for each property management company, in some case homeowners, depending on the situations, because there are some landlords who switch up the property management company every few months, so that everyone can come forward with like their plausible deniability of, oh, well, we don't know what happened last month when there was another property management company. So it's just a lot of like passing the buck. So we're going after the landlords in those instances.
Kelsey Steed, that's another person I hope that you would connect with. She's our landlord liaison at Opportunity Council, and her job really is to encourage landlords to work with our housing programs, but also to provide support for the community with some mediation and problem solving when there's issues with tenancy. And she says that she talks about mold with people a lot, and says it's really hard to hold those owners and management companies accountable, which we know from you, Rebecca, and probably anyone who rents in Bellingham will know that. You need significant evidence and legal representation to sue for rent reduction. And that sounds like what you're doing, right? Yeah. And then Doug's got some question about the cases. Like, if it wins, what'll happen? Do people get money? Will they have to fix the issues? Or is it more about damages paid to people who are impacted?
All of the above. So yes, this is this litigation. The attorney is doing this on contingency, which is lovely. And so in my experience, yeah, it's people will be getting payouts for what they lost to be made whole, and in some cases like punitive damages. And so we're not looking at this as like, I got $100, so I won. It's more like 100 people got $100, and now that person doesn't have that money to buy more properties, and that's a win for everyone. So any amount is a win for every renter, and I can't wait for people to each get $100. But also, and just for a little bit of context, so I'm a burn victim, and a decade ago rented an apartment that was not up to code and had 2nd and 3rd degree burns on my face and chest and arms. So that's I really needed an advocate when that happened. I was a comedian in Chicago, and it really just like caused a lot of upheaval. So that is kind of it. after, so many years going through it, processing it, and going through the litigation, found one attorney after meeting with a dozen that would take my my case on contingency. And that was like going into the emergency room and the burn unit and having to like stay home for fear of like infection and having to get bangs for the first time when it's like didn't really suit my hairstyle at the time. It was devastating. So I knew that I needed an advocate and didn't have one. And so when I met the woman whose daughter had her place burned down, she'd been a foster child until she was like 9, and then she was adopted. And I'm also an auntie to foster kids, so I felt tender to that. And I'm like pushing 40, so if I'd been popular in high school, I could have a kid that age. And luckily I'm like a late bloomer, but there's definitely like a generational like sense of tenderness. So I just decided like I'm going to be the advocate they needed. But in that case, I didn't have the advocacy. I settled for like less than my medical bills, and but was just wanted to have it over. So a lot of people that I'm talking to who have the most serious issues are like, I just can't. The most vulnerable populations are not going to be part of the mass actions because they just are too traumatized from their rentals. And so it's really up to the people who have had like moderate damage, or are just especially angry, or just like love hanging out and talking about landlords. Like those are the people who are really going to make a huge impact. And so I think the sentiment that I'm getting from a lot of folks in this is like, yeah, that was what they're behaving unethically and they need to be held accountable. And they're not really concerned about the money that they're getting. But we want things to be righted. We want money that was illegally charged to be returned.
Thanks, Rebecca. I really appreciate you sharing your personal experience, and also Poe as well, because that really roots us in where you're coming from. And when we think, sometimes I live in the world of homelessness, right? So I'm thinking about trauma people experience as a result of their homelessness. And I hadn't until just now thought about the trauma they can experience while housed. And that's a lot to deal with. And I think this is very much relevant to the coalition's work, honestly, because the folks in those month-to-month leases, the folks who can't live in their homes because they're unsafe, those are going to be our clients. We got to stop this babies being thrown in the water at some point, right? And it starts with stabilizing housing.
Yeah. And I would love to have criminal charges brought to people who have houses that are like, that they know aren't safe. When they're not inspecting as they should be, or they're just being really flippant about repairs that need to be done. I want criminal charges brought against those folks. Like, that's what I want. I want all of their money. I want all of their property, and I want them to be in jail because they can't be trusted to be around a community.
You got some love from Poe in the chat here. He appreciates you. Thank you for your work.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions for either Poe or Rebecca? Because we might have a little bit of time to talk about outreach that Heather Kay is asking about in the chat.
And also, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to monopolize and be long-winded. My contact info is on the website, but I'll also put it here. You're welcome to email tenantsrevolt@gmail and visit the website and check it out. And I'd love to continue conversations with anyone who's curious or has ideas. This is a radically adaptive action, and we have our strategy and our course that we're absolutely taking until it's replaced with something better. So I look forward to feedback, and yeah, thanks so much.
It looks like Vaughn has a question.
Hi, I was a question for both. What are your thoughts on rental caps and different kinds of rental caps, whether it's in an HOA or statewide? Or I think I remember the Housing Alliance talking about in January, there being more of a push for conversations on rental caps, and legislation that's going to be introduced, or for discussion. Just what are your thoughts?
What a spicy topic, Bon.
Yeah, I would like to add something. This is Chance with Lydia Place. It's really about that law, RCW 3521-830, that basically makes it illegal in Washington State for us to have rent caps. That has to be repealed, and we should definitely work on that if we can.
Yeah, if I can answer real quick and add my little 2 cents in, if that's okay. When I hear about the folks experiencing substandard living conditions and retaliation from landlords, it reminds me of one of our bills we're pushing for this year is House Bill 2023. It's all legal stuff, the representation and support by way of the legal action. And then the other bill, House Bill 1904. By the way, we have 2 rent cap bills we're supporting this session, 2 rent cap bills. But House Bill 1904 is not rent control rent cap, but it is a 6 months notice to give folks enough time to. I feel like they should get more than 60 months, but we're supporting a bill that will allow folks 6 months to find housing, to establish a stable home, find a job, get their kids into the right schools, and so we're really trying to push for rent caps and accountability with landlords and property managers and things like that. Yeah.
I'm going to defer to Poe on that one in a big way, because everything that was said, I was like, yep. Also, I keep stressing the point that when it's something that we're paying for that's too much money, that's one important component. The other thing is, like, are you paying $500 for a winter coat that's like warm and wonderful and you can stay in, or are you paying $500 for a garbage bag with duct tape? So it's really a matter of, like, is what we're paying, is it in line with like what we're getting? Also, is this a safe home? I want that to be part of the conversation with rent caps, because it's very relevant to what we're seeing.
It's real.
Let's say, may I?
Yes.
So let's say everything works beautifully and caps get passed. Would that mean at least another 2 years of waiting for that kind of, the rent cap thing to be repealed and then something new to be brought forth? At least 2 years?
From what I see, no. But there always seems to be, and I've only been in the housing justice legislation work for the past year and a couple of weeks. Before that, I did police reform in 2021 and 2020. But they always seem to find loopholes, and the advantage with them is, personally for me, my standpoint is I'm not well versed with a lot of the things just yet of how they're finding loopholes on getting around some of the things that we're pushing for. I think implementation is going to be important. Enforcement is going to be important once things are passed. Very hopeful for them to pass. And it's going to take a lot of us getting at these lawmakers and educating them and really putting pressure on them this session to pass these R2 rent cap bills.
And I'm not sure how familiar people are with the class action suits that have been filed in Seattle, but it's Hagen's Berman is the legal group that is taking that on, and I think that there's going to be a real shift, and with these suits being filed and with us seeing the way that rents have been artificially inflated, I think we're going to see some movement and some faster movement around writing that, because it's really clear that that's been that they've gone to lengths that are illegal and unethical and all these things. And so I think that some of these people are going to rectify the situation before they're forced to, because they don't want the hammer to come down quite as hard.
Right. And to add to that, I met with a couple lawmakers yesterday, and they're telling us at the Housing Alliance that housing and legislation around homelessness prevention are at the top of the list with lawmakers this session. So it's a real prime time, I think, for us to really take advantage of this, the momentum, and just give it to them. These two bills I introduced today, they just didn't pass last session, and we're really optimistic and hopeful this session. We know where we may have come up short, and we know where we need to, level up on some of the advocacy and organizing we're doing, but we're really hopeful for rent caps and all these other bills that we are pushing for, and funding to be a success by March, by the end of session.
I want to add to that I think the Resident Action Project is interested in this topic. And I know there is a lot of effort to start a chapter in Whatcom County. I don't know if you all were able to meet with Dula Rahima when she hosted a summit. I unfortunately not able to be there, but if anyone wants to get involved with the Resident Action Project in terms of advocating for rent control, I'm happy to make that contact with Dula Rahima, who's trying to organize that chapter. And if you want me to, just put your email in the chat and I'll email her. Okay, any other questions before we move on? I think I just have a few moments to talk about Heather Kay's questions. She has some questions about outreach that's happening in the county. Oh, Joe is still here, good. So the outreach that is going on there's a whole lot of it, honestly. There's mental health providers that are doing outreach. There's Grace and Lead doing outreach. There's Lake Whatcom Center is doing outreach. There's a lot of different groups who do outreach. So I can speak to the HOT team. And I know that means Homeless Outreach Team. Sorry, the HOT team is what it is. We've got 6 members. We are short 2 right now, but we have selected folks and are going to be onboarding shortly, plus their manager. And they've been pretty much restricted to the city due to funding for a long time, with some exceptions. We have some funding that allows us to serve veterans in the county. We have some funding that allows us to serve folks who might need supports with opiate substance use disorder. But just recently, and this is something I'm really stoked about, my boss, Greg Winter, was able to obtain some funding from Commerce that allows us to go into rural areas and really try to reach, in particular, those BIPOC communities that we're not well connected to. So that funding is limited, but it expands our reach somewhat. So that's what the HOT team can do. They work Monday through Friday from 5 when we're fully staffed up. It's from 7 a.m. to 5, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, when we're all staffed up, it's into the evening about 7 o'clock. And I'm hoping, Joe, and I'm so sorry to call you out like this, that you wouldn't mind talking about other groups, because I know you convene that great kind of summit with outreach groups a few times, and everyone's said such great things about that.
Well, so there's also, thinking of mental health. So Lake Whatcom Center has the HEART team, the HEART program. They primarily focus on people who are enrolled in Lake Whatcom Center, mental health services. And then there is a crisis outreach program that's not specific with Compass Health, that's not specifically focused on, housing or homelessness as such. And then the team I work on, CORES, Lucy, who spoke earlier, she's on the team too, and I'm not sure if Hadrian's here or not, but the 3 of us make up that program, and it's like an outreach program for people who are housed or unhoused or unstably housed, who also have mental health concerns. And you mentioned Grace and Lead. And I know that it was Chris, I think, who put in their Bridge to Services that Lorelei is involved with, and some others. And let's see, who else was I'm trying to think. Oh, Northwest Youth Services also has an outreach program. I know they had some staff changes, so I haven't really been in touch with them. And that's what comes to mind. I don't know if there are others that other people are thinking of. Yeah, the Lighthouse, right? The Lighthouse Mission has, Adam, he's on here somewhere. He used to be involved with that. And Kelsey, I don't know if she's here, is doing that. And I guess they're looking for somebody for a partner for Kelsey to continue that work. So I hope that informs you a bit, Heather, in terms of things. If you want, Heather, I can give you, I'll put my number in the chat there. And I don't work Friday, so that's tomorrow. So, but you know, if you wanted to call me next week or something, that would be cool. You know, if you had a question that I might answer.
Thanks so much for that, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Sure, put it in, leave the chat on at the end. And Chris, I want to thank you and Beck. There's really a difference this year. And if somehow the information that Joe is sharing can get on the Whatcom Health Department page, where we can have a bit more information on outreach sheltering in place, because that's been a big gap. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. I think I'm going to go ahead and switch into updates because we're getting a little bit close on time here. Katie, do you mind doing an update for the city?
Of course. Thanks so much, Terry. And thank you, Poe and Rebecca, for this really insightful discussion. I really appreciate learning more from all of you. I only have a couple updates today. The first is about the NOFAs. So it's that time of year when we at the City of Bellingham release our Notice of Funding Availability Opportunities, or NOFAs for short, which provide community partners an opportunity to apply for funding across a variety of different projects and programs. We're planning on publishing a number of different of those NOFAs to our COB site early next week. These NOFAs are intended to support specific capital projects and human services programs. The categories that we plan to publish include funding opportunities for rental housing production, so mostly multifamily rental projects. We also have a preservation NOFA going up, which includes, in addition to multifamily rental projects, it also includes transitional housing and emergency shelter. We also have a community facilities and improvement NOFAs, which includes the capital costs for multiple types of nonprofit run community services, such as childcare, food, shelter, other resources. In addition, we also have our housing and human services NOFA opportunity going live. This is a category that doesn't necessarily support capital projects, but it's awarded on a 2-year cycle. And it's intended to support social service programs, serving specific populations. In addition to these opportunities, we're also going to be publishing an invitation to submit a letter of interest for a program specifically designed to provide prevention and diversion services to vulnerable households in the community. I'll post a link in the chat to the place on the website where we'll be publishing these, but I wanted to give everyone here heads up, also give a rough sense of timeline that these opportunities are going to be published early next week. And we're going to ask and require that any application returned to us be returned by January 30th. So if there's any questions on any of this, please feel free to reach out and let me know. Also, please feel free to put your email in the chat if you're interested in receiving an email about these NOFA opportunities. Happy to kind of follow up when we follow up with all of our providers with more information. So I'll put that in the chat, but the next update I wanted to briefly discuss is also the severe weather day use warming center we have planned here at the city. I know we kind of discussed this program a little bit broad strokes at our last full coalition meeting in October. And I know we've talked about it in the steering committee since then, but I don't think we've discussed it as a group now that the plans are a little more solidified. So I just wanted to kind of talk about it briefly here. Also, now that we're fully into the winter season, just want to share more program details with this group. So the top line details are the city is going to be funding a day use warming center, which is going to run out of the downtown library in the lecture room when the program is placed into service. The program is going to be operated by Road to Home, a community provider who also is going to be operating the county's overnight severe weather shelter, which is funded by the county, but also has been in operation the past week or so. The day use center is only going to be placed into service in the event of a severe weather emergency. And if you're curious kind of what the criteria for that activation is, I can put a link in the chat to the County Health Department's winter shelter site, which is where folks can find that specific criteria outlined. When placed into service, the day use warming center's hours will be 9:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. and intake is going to take place on site. So yeah, I'll put that info in the chat. Feel free to reach out if there's any questions on that. And that's all I've got for city updates today. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Katie. Anyone have a question for Katie? Seeing none? Okay. I'm not sure whether Chris or Barbara wants to do an update for the county, but one of you maybe, please.
Yeah, I'll get started. A lot of what I was going to say ended up coming out already. Thank you, Katie, and thank you, prompts in the chat. The severe winter shelter, I think, is probably the thing that people are most interested in, the most urgent right now. It has been open for the last several days. It's likely going to be open for the next several days. We've committed to 2 more at this time, but it's quite likely that'll go for longer. It's been utilized well, maybe too well. I think they had close to 60 folks there the last couple of nights. Excuse me. Tonight is going to be the first night that the Christ the King and Lighthouse operated shelter is going to be opening up the old drop-in center down on F and Holly. So we're hopeful that that's going to take a big load off of the civic structure. You know, as I had pointed out, there's a lot of folks that don't like going into big crowded spaces. I think there's really no other way to call that shelter or anything other than a big crowded space with 60 folks in it. So with people balanced out, we're hopeful it's a more inviting environment. We'll see how that goes as far as where people will choose to go and where they prefer to be. But there is a new option coming on tonight. There's also the shelter up in Ferndale. Ferndale Community Services has been operating that. They are looking for more volunteers. The more volunteers they can get committed and trained, excuse me, the more they can open. That's a big limiting factor for them, is just having the staff to keep that operating. So if anyone's interested in volunteering, there's a link on the health department's website, which is in the chat a couple times already. Check that out and have a look. Excuse me. Lastly, Northwest Youth Services is working to put together something for a young adult shelter serving 18 to 24. They are in the planning stages of that as well. They've got some logistical hurdles they'll try to climb over. One of those is also having volunteers to help support that. So if folks are interested in working with that demographic, or maybe are interested in going up to Ferndale to help out with that project, Northwest Youth Services is probably going to be another option here. Let me know if that's something you're interested in. I'll get you in touch with their staff. I don't want to get into too many of these details. 2023, as far as health department services, is probably not going to be too different than 2022. We are adding a new staff member early next year who's going to have a more focus on affordable housing development. So we are happy to get that expertise in-house to look to bring on more affordable rentals, affordable home ownership opportunities, potentially more shelters and other resources like that. So expect us to do a little bit more work outside of the direct service field, or partnership with agencies that provide direct services as we move into 2023 and hopefully beyond that as well. Looking at the time, I think I'll stop yapping. Barbara, please add anything that I left off, and then happy to take questions as well.
Sounded good, Chris. We'll save some time for questions. Thank you.
Looks like Vaughn has a question.
I had just a picture that popped up in my head. Like I've been thinking about harm reduction models, and you know, Bellingham has a clinic, a methadone, and 2 other medication, like medically assisted treatment center on Northwest. And I was wondering if there have been any discussions on like a combination of an emergency shelter, something set up in partnership also with like medically assisted treatment. So like, what would it be like if the clinic also had a residential something or an emergency shelter option, where then during the severe weather, like people who really need the shelter can come in and also have that option of a safe place to get treatment, at least get that started if that's where they are in their journey.
I think that's a smart
Yeah, that's a
idea.
great idea. There is some stuff sort of like that. I don't know a ton about it. A lot of that's kind of more in the behavioral health field, but there is the new recovery house on Girard Street, which offers shelter for people in recovery. I know Lifeline Connections, I don't know if anyone is here today, but they've picked up a grant to do some housing assistance for people going through treatment there. So those things do get paired together. The first thing you learn about housing first principles is that it's really hard to get sober when you're not sheltered and have a place to live to do that in. So we do try as much as we can to kind of partner those two ideas, having a safe place to be and a safe place to enter into recovery. That's obviously an area where we need to grow more. We need resources so that more people have that opportunity. So that is something we're aware of and working on to the extent that we can.
Thanks, Chris. Any other questions? Okay, I'm just going to run through the service center update super fast. We are meeting, I think, next week with our partners at the county to talk about conducting the point in time count for 2023. This usually happens around the end of January. And I want to kind of link that to an observation I shared with steering last month, and that's that we're seeing some pretty alarming trends in our housing pool data. We're seeing an increase of applicants, but we're seeing increases in special populations. So you might not have heard, we've spent a lot of time in the community talking about families with children who are experiencing homelessness. That has increased dramatically throughout the pandemic and does not appear to be slowing down. We're also seeing a decrease in people who are becoming homeless as a direct result of domestic violence. And this is going to be a topic for our next coalition meeting, by the way. When I reached out to the executive director of DVSAS, she confirmed our suspicions and said, yeah, during lockdown, there were so many people who could not escape their abuser, and it's just compounded their situation in a very concerning way. And then the last comment I want to make, and I know it's doom and gloom, but it's the truth, y'all. Older people are becoming homeless at a really alarming rate. Just in the last year, we've seen it quadruple. So just to give you an idea of perspective of how many households compared to all applicants at that time, I think at the time I measured this, there was 659 households in the housing pool. There are more now. About 200. No, I'm sorry. I believe it was about 100 were seniors and nearly 200 were families with children. So really concerning stuff. And I expect to see that reflected in the point in time count most likely. We are hoping to start our walk-in hours in the service center this month. We're finalizing our process and procedure. I'll probably send an email out to the whole coalition when you know. So that's people who need help with their housing search, whether they're literally homeless or not. And also people who have questions about their application in the coordinated entry system can actually reach staff and talk to them about those concerns and questions. And that's been a gap we've had in our department for some time. So I'm really excited to increase that accessibility. We're recruiting for a couple positions. One is our program support specialist, and this job, it's not yet posted. So if you're interested, keep your eyes peeled, but this job works in the coordinated entry system specifically, does some admin stuff, but a lot of client interaction, and most likely will be one of the folks who respond to people who visit at walk-in hours. And then the other position we're going to be recruiting for is a healthcare navigator, and this is really specific to veterans only. So this position will work closely with our SSVF Program Opportunity Council, assisting those veterans in navigating their healthcare. Do they have insurance? Do they have transportation? Do they need an advocate in an appointment? This position can do that kind of work. And lastly, but probably the most important thing I want to share is that the Homeless Persons Memorial Day is this month on the winter solstice. We've had it virtually during COVID. It was fine, but it really was not an adequate replacement for being in person. So I'm really happy to say that this year we're meeting on the City Hall steps as we have in previous years. So please attend. I would love to see everyone there and help us recognize and honor the people we have lost this year as a result of their homelessness. It's at 5:30 on the 21st, front steps of City Hall. We'll have Councilmember Anderson. She'll be there reading a proclamation. And then members of our homeless outreach team will be reading out the names of those that we've lost. And if you have anyone you want to make sure that we are recognizing, please email, I'm just going to say email me. Let's see, what is the best way to do this? I think you can email me at Terry, TERI_BRYANT at wacomhc.org, and I'll make sure they get on the list. Put it in the chat right now. Would it be helpful if I did a quick email to the coalition to solicit names? We cannot collect names by email. You have to call us because it's a confidentiality issue, but Barbara's nodding. Okay, I'll do that too. I'll solicit names with a big email to the whole coalition. I know we're over time. It's 5:02. Does anyone have anything before we end? Any public comments or? No. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I thought it was a really interesting conversation. And at one point we had over 50 attendees, so I think that might be a record. Thanks so much, everybody, and have a great night.
Thank you, Terry.
Thanks, Terry. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Terry.
What do you think about Rebecca? She's a firecracker.
She said she was
She's hilarious.
I feel like I may have seen her.
Really?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Chicago.
Maybe you did. Yeah, she had a faulty pilot light, and they were like, wouldn't fix it. They're like, just light it yourself. So one night she did that, and it blew up in her face, literally. So she's got a lot of power behind her words. But yeah, she's a cool lady. And I could tell that it made some of our funders a little uncomfortable. But I'm sorry. Yes. Jeez. Oh, I think he's Seattle. But I think the Alliance is actually headquartered in Olympia. But a lot of them work remote, so he might be working remotely too. But yeah, he's a cool dude.
Just to see if there's out there that get a better understanding of that low income tax credit housing issue that I'm dealing with.
Oh yeah.
No past support of being advocacy.
Oh my God.
And
Careful with that.
no, I just making sure that all parties involved.
Yeah, you're mediating, aren't you?
I call out a couple of people I was trying to find people that was trying to state the case for these families.
It's their ownership. Yeah.
Yeah, Steve, the guy that thinks just kept shutting it down. So, nope, this is a disorganization. It's not really good.
Wow. And they're not disenrolled. Yep. That's horrible. Hi.